our last recommendation is about getting loud. And so many of the things that you shared in your breakout group, finding a way to get loud about sharing those stories, those challenges, those barriers, the opportunities that are needed, sharing that in a meaningful way with someone who can help you sort of address those challenges is where we want to get to with this get loud, please. And that will help you amplify not only your own sort of personal challenges with the administration and service delivery, but also frustrations that you hear from clients who kind of keep coming back with the same challenges and you're unable to help get them into an attachment in the workforce or in the community in sort of a meaningful way that's long-standing. And so amplifying those voices, sharing those stories, that's sort of where the last recommendation that we had for the report was. And one of the things that we called upon government to do was also offering opportunities to provide employment opportunities for those from underrepresented groups. Like if we are saying that these people are employable, then we need to walk our talk and employ people who maybe have differences of abilities or view the world in a different way or, operate differently due to a physical disability or a neurotypical way of understanding the world or an indigenous lens. We have to walk our talk and employ people from that space because it will help us with our service provision as well. And so I'm going to invite Peter back here to provide some of his insights because it's got a long-standing history of employing people from traditionally underrepresented groups. And I think that can really, and that did happen on this research project as well. I should highlight that two of our research assistants and many of the people on the broader research team were from underrepresented groups or identified in ways that are against the quote unquote norm. And I use that term very, very loosely. So Peter, what can you share about your experience employing people from underrepresented groups?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question in a lot of ways because, one of the pieces that sort of sits as a foundation to that is our own value as an organization, that we choose to hire people from diverse groups. So we want to do that. But there's also a rural reality, which is where do we find those folk? And will they possibly have any skills or experience in the field? Would they have any qualifications in the field? And so because we have that value of hiring locally and that we're trying to find folk from diverse groups, we can be quite challenged in terms of just being able to recruit folk. But I think that reality is that we can hire people who live locally and then make the decision to train them in a particular area that's needed within the organization. And that's really worked very well for us. When we started the work with Life Strategies, we really hadn't done much in the way of research work. And we were faced with hiring research assistants. And I just remember thinking, where are we going to find these people? And then it sort of occurred to us, really, let's just follow our ethic. Let's just go with our own, the approach we use for everything. And so we hired folk with lived experience that we'd known of and that, we'd done some advertising. And so we brought in two people who turned out to be amazing. They got great training. I think that was a really great part of the partnership. But they led with a passion and a ferocity that was astonishing. And I think that in many respects, because they lived in rural and remote communities, because they were people from diverse communities, they had a greater degree of credibility when they sat down and spoke with folk in community. Like they just knew that, oh, you're from here or you're from a small town. And so they were able to enter into conversations that were much more profound and substantial. So I think there's that part of it. But I would say that for anybody in rural communities who's trying to move forward with that value, You just need to be kind to yourself, recognizing that this is really difficult to do. Just to get, people of color, indigenous people, queer folk to even apply for a job with your organization is so difficult. And so, we do try to use our network throughout the community to find folk who we might be able to attract to positions. Thanks.
Peter. Yeah, I can't speak highly enough to the two research assistants in particular. I had just such a lovely time working with them. And I think that lived experience you speak of really brought an asset to the team and, challenged us to look beyond our own biases and stuff. Cause, I'm coming from Langley. It's not like it's a big city, but it's certainly not a rural space. So Roberta, thoughts?
Yeah, I think that when we are walking our talk, then we're certainly more credible. And that's something that I've always seen Free Rein do. I think as well, when we're sharing our stories, stories are relational. And so I want to go back to what Eve said earlier and a conversation that was in the chat between Deborah and Nancy, where someone, said, it's not what you know, but it's who you know. And then Deborah came back with saying, I like to say, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And so Janet talked about the importance of collaboration, but collaboration, networking, whatever term you choose to use, it's about relationship and it's about connection. And so if we are writing to an audience that we don't know, if we are, sending out reports or proposals where we don't have relational connections, then they're not going to be read the same way. They're not going to be taken the same way as when we are able to share very, very human, personal stories that connect with the people that we're talking to. I think as well, it's helpful to have a variety of experiences. Peter said, hiring people and then training them. I'm a real believer in that, but I'm also a real believer in transferable skills from other jobs we've had. So I worked really briefly when I was young for the provincial government and then for 16 months with the federal government. And those roles have fueled almost 50 years of experience in the field. And so being able to draw from having sat on the other side of the desk, from understanding what it takes to say yes, from understanding the kind of information that you need and the kind of documentation that you need is really important. So in the chat earlier, someone had mentioned that the government just doesn't understand the good work we do. No, they don't. If you're not sharing the information that you said you wished you were collecting, if you're not sharing the information that you are in fact collecting, but maybe not required to report. So people aren't going to just know what it is you're doing or what the needs are if you in your frontline roles aren't sharing them. And so we need to find ways of making those connections and those relationships really strong and of building credibility so that when we speak, people listen and they don't just see us as complainers in the community, or they don't just see us as, advocates in the sense of, having sort of a one-line story that we constantly go back to. But in fact, we really are representing and amplifying the voices of the people that we're working with every day and the needs that we're seeing. So we need to be credible. We need to be connected. We need to be relational. And I just love what Deborah wrote. It's who knows you. So we also need to be visible. Yeah, and yeah. I encourage you to be involved in community events. And our research team did a really good job of that, going into communities in all sorts of events where they became part of the community last summer.
Yeah, Robert, I think some of what you were just talking to really speaks to, like, we as career practitioners, as people within the career development ecosystem, have a responsibility and the ability to contribute to the development of policy. Policy doesn't just happen to us, but what we need to do is engage in a relational dynamic of communication with those who are making the policies in order to have stuff that works for everybody, right? Because again, going back to the you don't know what you don't know, right? Like the people working on the policy end don't know that you're doing good work if you don't tell them. They don't know that something is super frustrating unless you tell them. Or maybe the interpretation of the policy is actually the issue. And there's ways to work around if you can have that relationship together. So maybe just your final thoughts on how equipped career practitioners are to work within these policy constraints.
Well, I think it hasn't been a key part of training. And we also know that most people, as Peter already mentioned, many people in our field, and I will say, because we've got people from Quebec here, that Quebec is an exception. You may not be aware of how robust the training is for career professionals within Quebec and also New Brunswick within Francophone Canada, but certainly not within other parts of the country. And so we need to pay attention to how to learn these kinds of skills, but also to have these conversations and webinars like this and informal ways of incorporating people as part of proposal writing so that you actually have a team contributing to the proposal that can bring in these sort of real life frontline stories. So I would say that formally we're not equipped, but we are really well positioned. And so career development practitioners have a lot to offer to influence policy, absolutely, for sure.
So I'm just going to open one more Mentimeter. In the spirit of collaboration, how could policymakers help help you do your work better or more effectively? But I also recognize Megan messaged me. My apologies for not seeing it sooner. Just had an additional thought she wanted to share about this Get Loud recommendation. Megan, if you're still in the room, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thanks, Cassie. It actually adds on to what Peter and Roberta were both saying, with that sort of sense of you don't know what you don't know. And when Peter spoke to the rural realities of where do we find people, I then remembered of what it was like once we had found our research participants to ensure they could do their jobs well. And our group were talking during one of the breakout sessions about some of the accommodation challenges we found on the road during our research, where one of our research assistants, Madeline, who utilizes a wheelchair, couldn't access our hotel rooms always. And so sometimes, especially with getting loud, the first challenge is the will with employers, the willingness to bring on somebody with an underrepresented challenge or diverse ability or something you don't know. But then you encounter the challenges that I think of people with disabilities. They know them on the daily, that they're their lived experience. They don't even see them as unexpected challenges anymore because they're there every day. But to the managers that are hiring them, they're brand new and they can be overwhelming. And so it's that getting loud about those challenges on behalf of our clients with diverse abilities as well, because they're tired of sharing those stories. And it's time for also the managers and us in the field to be like, hey, these are the challenges our clients are experiencing, and we need to be able to work around it, because it's not just getting them the job, it's also ensuring they can do the job.
I love what you're speaking to, because the first point here was support. And as you're speaking, I think, well, what support, right? Being really specific with your ask about what you need. And so going a little bit more deeply, and this be curious, ask questions. So we talked about this a lot when we were trying to ensure that there was a good space. It's like, what do you need to do your job better? And so being curious about that and being open to looking at different ways to structure work or tasks or things like that.
I've just been reading in the chat, and such good points there about that notion of who in different cultures having different connotations and leading to corruption and bias and all sorts of things. And we see that in Canada as well as in other parts of the world. So recognizing that, recognizing the challenges with that, and then also making it work with you in an ethical way, I think is really important. I'm also seeing lots of conversation around resumes and CVs and how the technology is really replacing people, and so making it challenging to see the person behind the documentation or the professional behind the documentation. And all of those are really good points that emphasize the importance of personal connection and relationships.
Absolutely.
So lots that we can be doing and lots that policymakers can be doing to help us out, eh?
Yeah, definitely.